Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 8 as we continue the conquest of Britain. We are now up in the northern half of Scotland, driving the English before us. Airborne unit command and control. Okay, well. Special ops, airborne unit command and control. We'll let that go. Foreign transport. Plane has advanced as well. Yeah, we could use the extra range. We're using armor in the Highlands. How funny. Excuse me. So marine crew training has developed as well. And we're going to let that go also. Okay, and we can expand our radar training. We'll do that. Drive Inverness. Probably just do this and have a lake impassable like one of these things here. Because Loch Ness is really long, and I'm trying to think here. Even, you know, it's not practically bridgeable, but I mean, I guess you could theoretically ferry stuff across it, but it'd take a major ferrying operation to get across. Okay, well, we have a moving, I think we are, aren't we? Oh, it's already made it there. Okay, well, that's good. Well, I want to get some light troops. Okay, now. I need to deal with revolt risk here as well. Okay, aircraft carrier armor. Nope, we still need to let that go. So, heavy bomber prototypes. Advanced, okay. Let's increase their and heavy transports organizations as well. Oh, his headquarters is way down there. Still okay. Well, whatever. I know I could reassign them, but there's really not that much fighting left being done. We're just mostly forcibly occupying. Okay. We're turning them into temporary Marines. Get ashore quickly. This is a bit overkill, isn't it? Coming in here with all these units. What are we doing out here? Alright, I guess. We have a few up here, don't we? That we should. And I sent them up there, are sort of to be on their way somewhere else, but convoy rating passive. That way they will see about rating down. Way down here. Can we get out to the islands? Yes. Okay, you guys are going to be temporary Marines. Just invade there. Lots of units and organization I need to do. I've got a couple of Marine divisions coming here. Where are they? Down here a ways, I know. Oh, maybe further down than I was thinking. Yeah. I'm also building a few more just garrison battalions to help garrison Britain. Mentioning that, we could use a few more police units. Whether for Britain or for some other place. And we'll build a couple more convoys. We're already down to 40. And we're already building some, but I expect we'll take losses the more closer we get to the US. Okay, we're being attacked here by these guys. I think they're going to exhaust themselves. 4-engine armor research. Send these to the northern flank here. Now that they're scrap of flow. Can't go up there. Didn't think we could. Now what we're going to do is send these guys up to here. Rebase. Hopefully that battleship that we saw around here won't be too much of a problem for Bismarck and Gneisenau. Okay. It looks as though Britain has fallen and is now a government in exile. Okay, control over Europe, we have that. National unity plus one party support plus 10%. Naval builder, we've got the docks at Belfast or something like that. So naval organization plus 10% and minus 5% on naval build speed. Motorized HQ, sub advance. We can go with that. Now enforce conquer on Great Britain. Yes. Okay, Egypt. What should we do with Egypt? This is part of the surrender. We can give it to Italy, or we can keep it for the Reich. I'm torn on this, but one thing that just popped in my head, because the person who was born in Egypt, the highest ranking German, was Hess, who's, you know, left here, and I wonder, would Britain have evacuated him in time enough, or would we have liberated him? And if we had liberated him, I wonder what would have happened. Okay, just stray thoughts. Okay, let's see. Egypt in the Middle East takes control any of all. Takes control any of all. Egypt in the Middle East. It would free up this manpower. Now, I built a few garrison units to garrison the British Isles, but we could use these guys in other places, and we're doing well enough with fuel and other things. I don't think we need the resources here so much. That fuel is nice, and that fuel's even nicer. But we have want more fuel. 55 there, 52 there. Should be larger, but whatever. My cop 42. Yeah, we'll give Egypt to Italy. Okay, so now let's go back to. So now we've given Egypt over. What should happen? Sudan, or leave it to the English? We're going to give it to Italy as well. Now Cyprus. So how do you like my event that I coded up? Or most 90% of it or more of my coding for black ice. We can give it to Italy, or we can keep it. Again, we're occupying it to keep the bolt risk down, but there's just a little bit of that, so we don't need this anymore. Now so we're helping create the new Roman Empire. Okay, British Somaliland. That's here. Now, I'm going to editorialize, and I think I may have mentioned this before. I think, as we all know who pay attention to world politics, Somalia is a failed state. The government controls a little bit around Mogadishu, but there's various militia units still functioning in various areas, in my understanding. There's Al-Shabaab. I think I'm getting that right. No, it's Al-Shabaab. These guys. I think it's... Oh boy, I'm getting confused. But there's pro-Al-Qaeda terrorist group that's holding even parts of Mogadishu at this point, and it's basically a failed state. Now, I don't know how much you know about African politics. There's the Organization of African Unity, the OAU. One of the big charter elements of the OAU, one of the fundamental foundation stones of the OAU, is that African borders will never change. That has been very dogmatic, very much... Oh, we need to advance into... This is... So we gotta go through here. Is that the borders will never change, and you got to realize the borders were drawn by Europeans in a land grab situation, paying no attention to ethnic regions and groups, and paying minimal respect to geography. Obviously, rivers were important for European trade and communication, and then as they built railways, but it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, these borders. Now, there's a couple notable cases where, two of them I'm thinking significantly, and then a minor one, but where that's fallen apart, the borders will never change. One is Eritrea, has been created out of Ethiopia, and the other is South Sudan, wherever the border is along through here, that have been created in new countries. The other sort of border change was Southwest Africa got Wavis Bay from South Africa, but probably is within their ideology. So these countries make little sense if you were to look at actual tribal groupings and other things like that. Like the Biafran, probably most of you don't even know about this. The Biafran Civil War down here that tried to break away from rest of Nigeria. Capital of Nigeria is not Lagos, the largest city. It's up in here in the Muslim area, and sort of the Muslim dominated. But this rather industrious part of Black Africa was just obliterated back in 70s when they tried to break away and form their own country. And there's been other situations out into this part of the world with Morocco that the OAU has not wanted to recognize the existence of other countries. Well, there is another country out here that very, very few people recognize, is Somaliland. And it's once Somalia broke away and became a failed state, Somaliland broke away and set up its own country. And my understanding is there are no significant terrorist, and you can see it here as the British occupied zone. There are no significant terrorist bases or operations here. They're running a good, stable economy, but literally no one, and it's also promoted by the U.S. government, to not recognize Somaliland. English speaking is of a much higher level, and this is where helps reinforce my idea of culturalism, not racism, culturalism. And this is not talking about individuals, but talking about groups of people. I don't know if racially the makeup, and there's different tribes, but I don't know racially there's a significant difference between, now of course there's also the Ogden province in here that is more culturally group Muslim than it is grouped with the rest of Ethiopia, which was a more Christian tribe element. But all these people out here are sort of roughly the same ethnic group, as my understanding. Different tribes, but roughly the same ethnic group. This was governed by the British. And this was obviously governed by the Italians. The Italians, it's the failed state where the British, even after being part of it, has now bounced back, and it would be an economic success if the UN and everybody else would just recognize them. So are Italians better or worse people racially than British? No. It's a cultural situation that the British set up to better administer their colonies. Yeah, there's a lot of anti-colonialism out in modern philosophy. I am not an anti-colonialist. I understand why people would want to get rid of colonial rulers. Again, I'm an American. I understand why, but I'm not a reflexive anti-colonialism. Let's get rid of all of colonialism. No, I don't know, because we can look at failed state Somalia, we can look at failed state Libya, we can look at Syria, which was set up to be a Muslim group, and you have the Alawites who have been ruling there since basically the independence, in my understanding, and they set up Lebanon to be a sort of a Christian Arab group. And these borders and these groupings don't make sense in the modern world, but they were set up and administered and governed well enough, but they don't have a modern idea of nationalism. And when I say that, I'm talking about, and we see this in places like Iraq, and I know these are artificial groupings, but they are a tribal outlook of people. Again, this is not a racial viewpoint. I don't have a racist viewpoint. I have a cultural viewpoint. They're enculturated as they grow up as little children through their families, through schools, through all this. It reinforces this tribalistic viewpoint. I am not saying it is wrong, but it doesn't, they may call themselves Iraqi or Syrians or whatever, but that is not the most meaningful definition. In the U.S., in the United States, in these United States, it used to be these United States of America. After the American Civil War, it became the United States of America. Literally, it changed at that time. Before the Civil War, most people looked upon their state citizenship, that they were a Virginian, or they were an Alabaman, or they were a Massachusetts, or a New Yorker, or whatever. Some of these maybe smaller states that didn't have that much of an identity. They may have seen themselves as a Northeastern or something. They saw themselves as part of a greater thing, yes, but their state identity, because the culture of South Carolina was radically different than the New England culture. And I'm not even talking about slavery. We can take slavery right out of this. Because early enough, you go back, there was slavery in Massachusetts as well. I don't know if as part of the United States, but there was when it was a colony. We're not talking about slavery, but there was a significant cultural difference between these places. And so, if you will, its nationalism was based on states, not on counties or on family groupings. Now, you hear about the Hatfields and the McCoys, and they're very real. And part of that is they were, shall we say, isolated groups that had very little contact physically with the rest of the United States. And so that they did sort of in those. And it does come also out of the Scottish tradition that moved into there, that still maintained a strong, if you will, tribal or clan, as in their terms, identities. So not all of the world sees things in national identities. I think I've talked about before is like the caste system in India. I just think it's wrong. I know it's what's the reality in India. I am not thinking that I or the Western world necessarily should impose equal rights in India. But if you value such things, then, and if you value, shall we say, civilized behavior, because we can look at the uncivilized behavior going on, particularly in Syria right now, that much of the world practiced, and yes, it was practiced in Europe too, as things go on. We can look at different points in history, that colonialism, or European based colonialism, and we've talked about it, how ugly the situation was in the Congo under the Belgians, and we can look at some of these things most assuredly, and it's not, all colonialism is good, or all colonialism is better than what was there locally. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying colonialism or imperialism, which are two different things, actually. Similar things, but they are different. in and of themselves isn't wrong. I think whether it should be U.S. or British or UN, United Nations, and maybe we should reset up a situation more similar, shall we say, as what the U.S. had in the Philippines. It was accelerated because of World War II, and the Filipinos got out there and really fought for their independence from the Japanese. But even before Japan invaded, U.S., and I think it was like in 1950 something, like maybe 1955, I'm just pulling it out, but they had a sunset clause on U.S. control of the Philippines. And it was, like 20, 30 years ahead, from when they set it up. It was, oh, yeah, and in 30 years you'll be independent. We're going to help build culturally, structurally, as an infrastructure and things, your country up. And yeah, we're going to benefit economically as it goes along, but we're going to set you up as an independent country. It is a form of colonialism, not colonialism as in we're going to import a lot of Americans and move in there. It is a form of imperialism, most assuredly, in that we are controlling it. But it had a design sunset clause where the protectorate, UN mandates of like Syria and Jordan, because they were taken away from the Ottoman Empire, to the best of my knowledge, had no sunset clause. They weren't colonies in the pre-World War I sense. They were sort of the League of Nations mandates for controlling it, with the idea, I guess, eventually, someday, maybe they get their independence. But, so this is, get back to, I'm defending colonialism here, and I know I am. And I can also will defend people's, as groups, right to decide not to be a colony. So it can go either way. It depends on the conditions. Somalia today, who would really want it as a colony? How much blood would the colonial power need to spend on it? How much treasure, money would you need to spend on it? How much would you get back out of it? And God, setting it up under UN mandate, that sort of what it is now, and it's just chaos. So, but is it right, correct, moral, maybe? Is it moral to, one, allow chaos to come in there, and then we just can create chaos and bad living conditions for all humanity in there? Two, is it right to allow a power vacuum, to allow what, for lack of a better term, evil groups to come in who are willing to use brute, naked power, the power of the gun, to take over? Is it right to just let them take over? Even if they are just a localized, not a, oh, we want to spread terrorism internationally, but just, hey, I want to be a warlord, or whatever it is, just want to take it, or pick your ethnic group, we want to go in there and cleanse the people out of it one way or another, and then we will move in there and prosper. Is it right to do that morally? If, as you know, that failed states like Somalia, like Afghanistan, which was never really much of a state at all, that had a capital, of course, and the government controlled the capital, and the king, when Afghanistan had a king, but that never really governed all of Afghanistan. It's, in my opinion, always sort of been a wild spot. But if you allow wild spots like that to exist in the world and be ongoing ones, do you, and then they perpetrate, whether it's 9/11, whether it's the Paris attack, do you, because some of the groups that either won't or can't take over all of it, but can function within the chaotic parts of the world, that have an ideology that want to damage what I consider parts of the civilized world, not necessarily Western, because civilization and Western aren't always the same thing, but want to damage the civilized world, do you allow the conditions to exist? Do you allow, like failed state Libya, that's flooding into, particularly just because they're here locally, into Italy, large numbers of people? I understand they have or are rebuilding the wall along, there was a wall here between Libya and Tunisia, but they're rebuilding, or they're building a wall, barbed wire kind of fence wall to stop people coming in from Tunisia or through the desert. Do you just allow this chaos to come in here that allows other people from Africa who want to end up in Europe for the stability they believe in Europe? Do you allow that to happen, or do you intercept ships and just drop the people right back into the chaos? What do you do? At what point, and this is a tough question, at what point do you go in and say, hey, Italy, you get to have Libya. Yeah, you're going to have to put soldiers in there, but it's going to be part of Italy. At what point do you come in there and say that that is a better solution than neglecting it? That's sort of what the world has to come to terms with. And I don't think, especially since, look, the Chinese people, they don't care. The Chinese people, I'm not talking about the government, the Chinese people, they don't care what happens in India or Africa or South America. They are worried about themselves. They're worried about their country. They don't care about what's going on there anywhere else in the world. As a large group of people, I'm not saying if you were to have an intelligent conversation with one, they wouldn't want the best for other parts of the world. No, but they don't care enough to get involved to want to intervene. Now, the Chinese government wants to secure particularly mineral rights to things that aren't necessarily commonly found in China. They also are wanting to secure access to potential or actual markets for selling its goods, because they know that may not always be selling its goods to the U.S. They want to do some of that as well as just simply expanding it. So they're expansionistic, but when they're coming in here and developing places like Zambia and Rwanda and Burundi and other places like that, they're doing it out of an economic viewpoint. If you improve a road somewhere in here, it'll allow minerals to go out better and goods to come back in better. They're doing it as a pragmatic solution. And so they're very willing to intervene, but they just want, as I understand it, a stability locally. They don't care what really rules, so long as it may be not another great power, the U.S., Britain, Russia, whatever. But they otherwise want a stability. So it's sort of a new neo-colonialism, or neo-neocolonialism that they're practicing. So what should happen? I remember that, there was the Ethiopian famine and the Somali famine. That's what sort of got the U.S. involved in there. Well, famines are going to, droughts, I should say, are going to come and go around the world. But humanity basically produces more than enough food to feed humanity. Now, of course, we could see population booms, but currently we feed more than enough, or we make enough food to feed humanity. The problem is that there aren't modern highways in Somalia and a modern docking system that a ship can pull up, quickly unload it, put it on 18-wheelers, and get the food out quickly to the people. They've got to expensively come in, offload it manually, put it on helicopters or something, which are expensive to operate, and fly it out here. That is the expense of getting the food to here. So if you had an infrastructure in Ethiopia, in Somalia. You might still have the drought situations, but I don't think you would have the famine, because food would be cheaply and easily provided, whether through independent aid agencies, privately done, or through government aid agencies or other things. That's how it would work, and it would work efficiently. But because of anti-colonialism, because of poor leadership, again, I say it's cultural, not racial, that it doesn't work well, and you don't get the country's infrastructure developed. So I may be sounding like a 19th century do-gooder, colonialism justified through doing good. That's one, that there is a inherent wrongness about colonialism. Not talking about, again, a particular style of colonialism in a particular place that, at different times, maybe I should change the word to imperialism of itself, is an inherent bad. I don't know that creating large power blocks in and of itself is bad. United States of America. 50 states or 50 countries as one, enforced through a major civil war, that it will stay together, that it will use terrible, terrible weapons and kill many, many people to use starvation as a tactic to keep it together. Okay, that's what happened in the American Civil War. I would say India, especially when you look at it in this way, is another empire. It's a subcontinent. Obviously, it broke first into two pieces and then into three, with Bangladesh breaking off from Pakistan. And so I know, like, the Sikhs wanted, or they're somewhere in here, wanted to break off and have their own independent Sikh state. Are there cultural, ethnic, religious groupings that should or want to break up from India, from the Indian empire of it? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not advocating that they do that. I'm just looking at it. Is India inherently wrong? Is the Qin Empire, China, inherently wrong? Because there are other ethnic groups, but the Han have been dominating in there, and they're the primary ones. They're obviously occupying Tibet and Sikkim. Should it be broken up? Should Manchukuo be an independent country? Just because there's a Manchukuoan ethnic group? TRE, that has this preview for Rising Sun stuff, talks about Manchukuo is just simply the Japanese word for Manchuria. Talks about Manchurian nationalism, and there was a real, not just a puppet, but a real Manchurian independence, ethnic independence element going on there that got crushed by Japan because they were showing to be too independent from Japanese control. Sort of the double Asia for the Asians, but really Asia for the Japanese, from their propaganda. I know I'm going on about all this, but so is China itself as a grouping wrong? Is the British Empire, sort of, if it were reconstituted with the primary Anglo parts of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, in and of itself wrong? Now, I think Britain didn't learn from the American Revolution. Americans prior to 1768 or something, they were British. They thought of themselves as British. They were just they were sort of American British as opposed to Welsh British, as opposed to Northern British or Southern British or whatever. They saw themselves as British. It was the British that sort of taught them that they weren't British, and excluded them from Parliament and excluded them from everything else. Britain didn't learn that, oh, maybe if we'd just given them a few parliamentary seats, both a local government, because, hey, 6 months round trip for people to come and, effectively come between Massachusetts and Parliament's a bit too long to effectively govern from London, but maybe we give them a few seats, not one man, one vote kind of equal numbers of seats, but just a few seats in Parliament from each of the colonies, and so that they have some input on the overall government of the Greater British Empire, plus they sort of manage themselves locally because, hey, they're British people, they know how to manage themselves and they're too far away. This is before, obviously, transatlantic telephone cables. They can manage themselves, so they didn't learn that when they had a particular, like Canada or like Australia, when, particularly culturally similar colony, to give them some representation within the British Parliament. They didn't learn that lesson, so they lost their parliament, or they lost their empire again. Whether that would have ever worked with a such culturally dissimilar group like India, that's a different matter. So, I guess I'm arguing for imperialism. I'm arguing for colonialism, not just as a good in and of itself, and that all nations should be imperialistic or colonialistic, or that you shouldn't, or that it's a good in and of itself, but that it's not a wrong as it's been portrayed, particularly since World War II. I'm generally with Churchill. Now, he was defending British colonial and British imperial and colonialism, which, definitely has its faults. No, it also, in my opinion, has its benefits. So that has to be looked at in the modern upcoming world, because we can't just, in my opinion, let chaos reign, because if it does, it's going to tear everything down eventually. And someday, and we can't just go in there, kick their asses in Iraq, and then leave 10 days later. That doesn't work either. So you got to sort of have a plan. Now maybe you go, hey, Kurds, we're going to set you up as Uber Kurdistan, and you're going to have northern Iraq. Hey, Saudi Arabia or Kuwait, we're going to give you this part here, and Saudi Arabia or whatever, we're going to hand out chunks of stuff, and be sort of that way. Once you get somebody like that, or we're going to occupy you for a while and set up another government that we will like, that'll take 20 or 30 years to do it. You have to have the post, what do you do? Because if we were to overthrow Assad tomorrow in Damascus there, though I hear he's often hanging out in this area near some Russian ships that I think has moved his family on, or I heard that he had it for a while. If they were to go away tomorrow, that doesn't bring an end to the fighting in Syria. And if we just go in and stamp out Daesh or ISIS or whatever, that doesn't bring an end to the problems either, And so you've got to have, and just peace treaties, or just, I guess if they're truly meant, but ceasefires doesn't solve any of this problem, doesn't solve what happens to these people that are refugees, doesn't solve any of that. So this current viewpoint of can't be imperialistic at all is just wrong, but we can look at and see how culturally similar people, one is a failed state, the other one, once the state finally failed, is able to break away and is building up a good basis, and that is in my opinion, entirely based that it was a British colony, and the British had, not that they were so forward looking as, oh, how are we going to improve these people so that we can give them independence one day and they'll be good citizens of the world. No, they were trying to make good citizens of their British Empire. They weren't going to be English citizens of the British Empire. but they were going to be local Somali citizens of the empire and have them participate as clerks, as low-level functionaries. I don't know if they ever envisioned them voting into a local mayor election or whatever, but they had the sense of making good citizens of them and did, in my opinion, a much better job than the other colonial powers. And this is a stark case. I mean, we can see cases where it ended up not working. Zimbabwe is a complete and total utter failure, where I used to think Zambia was a failure, but compared to Zimbabwe, Zambia is doing pretty well. It was Rhodesia that was doing great. And yeah, there was racism in Rhodesia, I know it, but they were still doing great. And we're on the path to eventually get a better thing, but that got torn down, and that's a whole nother diatribe. Okay, so yes, we'll give Somaliland, they already own it, to Italy. You see now it's fully green. The Holy Land. Guess this is sort of redundant, because I think we could have kept Egypt, but okay. We'll also give that to the Italians. Malta, what should happen to Malta? We'll give it to... We can leave it to the English if they still... See, theoretically, I'm not sure what would happen if it would revert to English control or not, because it was designed, but I'm not going to test it right now. So we'll give it to Italy. Okay, Gibraltar. We can give it to Italy. We can give it to Spain. We can keep it as the Reich. We can leave it to the English. We're going to keep it here. Notice here we have a built a little airports here. And I should build some... Yep, I'm going right now. No. I'm going to do it here. I keep forgetting. Because I want to build a radar and I'm willing to supply it, I'm going to keep it as German, because the war is still going on. And I just want to be able to control and build it, so we're going to keep it as German. Singapore, what should happen with Singapore? We have the choice of either giving it to Japan or leaving it to the English. Well, I guess we're going to give it to the Japan, even though I sort of going to regret some of this, I think. Yeah. Hong Kong. Oh, we still have this. I think we'll lose our jungle colonizer benefit. Hong Kong. Give it to the English, give it to the Japanese, we'll give it to Japan. Don't know why that didn't change over. Whether that's a bad coding situation or not now. I want to look at... Okay, we're still at war with them. But that handled the peace and occupation of Britain. They, I think, are just, you know, here. I didn't want them to hand out the American colonies because I figured they went into exile. That's how I viewed this. And this is how Britain's going to stay. We're going to end the episode here shortly. Is this because we set it up as a puppet government for Germany. You can set it up as a German ownership, in which it would, you know, turn the same gray as the rest of Germany, but you'll get some revolt risk penalties in this region, sort of like you do, but even more so than in Russia here. So you can try to directly own it. This is the idea that eventually this Britain will be an independent national socialist state of some, or somewhat of an independent national socialist state. The other option is to set it up as basically an independent state, that you leave it out, but it's puppeted to Germany. But it's sort of neutral puppeted, so if you want it out of it. I really haven't done the follow-on events, which would be having King Edward come back into power. He's sitting off in exile as the governor of the Bahamas at this time. The guy with Nazi sympathies. So that's your other option with the surrender events. I'm also planning at some point to do a, like I say, follow-on events that cover Germany's occupation of Britain, largely based upon, or significantly based upon, a movie, It Happened Here. It's, I think, a 1960s sort of television type movie thing, filmed in Britain, about a Britain under German occupation during World War II, had it happened. Very interesting movie, at least partly written by a few very well-informed people on the situation. So it will eventually make a cool mod someday. Okay, well, we're going to end this episode here. Still a lot more to go with this campaign, because right now we've got this as part of the surrender events, but that's still independent. We're sending up the ships up here to get some of these mountain troops, because they're going to be more useful for fighting and occupying cold places up here. As you can see, getting into Arctic type. At least up here you are. Terrain in Norway, so we're definitely going to be doing some of that. And that'd be better than using the Panzer divisions that we've been using, and Panzer Grenadier divisions that we've been using for Britain. So once we get secure those bases with the mountain troops, then we're going to look at coming in this way, down through Canada. And also, while we're doing that, as we already are doing that, we've secured here. Now I just want to see, what's the range on this? Okay, too far to invade. Could have worried about that. These islands. I don't know. Maybe, oh, well, oh. Could be, oh, I thought we could make it. I think it's just the motor torpedo boats that can't get it across there. I'm not going to start the invasion, I just want to see if we can. Yeah, okay, good. That's what I thought we could do, get across there with these. So, yeah, so we can invade. This is the American occupied parts of Brazil, right here. But that will give us a port of either here or here. And would allow us to start moving here. So we're going to be doing that. It's just the Baltic Fleet flotilla that I used to escort them down here is, particularly those guys, is too short. Okay, thanks for watching. You can like the videos, of course. You can also comment on my thoughts on whether on imperialism and colonialism or other elements. Love to hear from you. Tell me why I'm wrong if you think I'm wrong. God, you know, I don't claim to have all the answers by any means, but this modern dogma, I know doesn't have the right answers. There may be a bunch of other Maybe a different answer, but theirs is not one that works.